Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to today's Explainer. We're looking at a time in history that honestly fundamentally rewired human civilization, the Gupta Empire. If you've ever found yourself wondering where some of our absolute biggest leaps in math, astronomy, and classical literature actually came from, well, you are in the right place. We're going to unpack exactly how the Guptas achieved what historians call the ultimate golden synthesis of ancient India, basically blending rock-solid political stability with an absolute explosion of intellectual and cultural creativity.
So what exactly makes a historical era golden? It's a phrase we throw around all the time, right? The Golden Age. But on the ground, what does that actually mean? Well, true Golden Ages, they aren't just about the temporary glory of massive armies or redrawing borders on a map. No, they're defined by the ideas, the art, and the scientific breakthroughs that managed to survive long after the empires themselves have literally crumbled to dust. The Guptas didn't just conquer territory, they conquered time.
To understand how they pulled this off, here is our structured roadmap. This will really help us unpack centuries of dense military, scientific, and cultural history. We'll cover rising from the ashes, forging the empire, a scientific golden age, literature and learning, the resurgence of Hinduism, and finally, their decline and lasting legacy.
Section 1. Rising from the ashes, order out of chaos. To really appreciate the stability the Guptas brought to the table, we've got to look at the centuries of chaos right before them. Golden ages don't just happen out of nowhere. They're usually a reaction to serious fragmentation. Looking at our timeline here, after the massive Mauryan Empire collapsed around 185 BC, the Indian subcontinent entered a massive 500-year gap of deep division. The region splintered into smaller kingdoms and faced wave after wave of foreign invasions. First the Greeks, then the Sakas, and eventually the Kushans, who set up a powerful kingdom around 25 AD. Now sure, trade and culture were still flowing, but there was zero unifying political force. That all completely shifted in 320 CE when a guy named Chandragupta I stepped onto the stage and finally brought unifying order back to the Ganges Valley.
Section 2. Forging the Gupta Empire, the Conquerors.
Now what's really interesting about this slide is exactly how the Guptas built up their legitimacy. Going from a bunch of fractured states to a unified superpower takes some serious, ambitious strategy. Chandragupta I didn't just brute force his way to the top with warfare. He laid the foundational bedrock of the empire through a brilliant strategic marriage to a Lichavi princess, Kumara Devi. This alliance was such a power move that it let him claim the extremely bold title of King of Kings. He centralized his power, but, and here's the smart part, he actually let regional governors keep a bit of local autonomy. So it was this perfect, delicate balance of top-down authority and local freedom.
But the vibe of the empire shifted massively across the generations, which you can see in this comparison. First up, you have Chandragupta's son, Samudragupta. He turned the kingdom into this vast, sprawling empire through incredibly aggressive military campaigns, honestly earning him the nickname the Napoleon of India. He annexed the north, demanded tribute from the south, the whole shebang. But then we get to his successor, Chandragupta II, also known as Vikramaditya. He took a totally different tack. While he did defeat the remaining Shaka rulers, mostly to lock down those super lucrative Western trade routes, his reign is actually famous for hitting the empire's ultimate cultural zenith. Under his watch, the aggressive expansion cooled off, settling into a prosperous golden era laser-focused on justice, booming trade, and profound support for the arts.
Section 3. A scientific golden age. Math and astronomy.
Once those borders were totally secure and the treasuries were overflowing, the empire kicked off an intellectual explosion unlike anything seen before. I mean, it still impacts us literally every single day. Just look at this striking number on the screen, 3.1416. Centuries, and I mean centuries before European mathematicians would lock these concepts down, a genius Indian scholar named Aryabhata accurately approximated the value of pi to 4 decimal places, and he likely even deduced that it was an irrational number. This wasn't just some abstract thought experiment. This was a fundamental breakthrough in understanding the actual geometry of the universe.
And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer, mind-boggling scale of Gupta-era scientific advancement. Writing in his famous astronomical text, the Aryabhata, Aryabhata correctly figured out that the Earth actually rotates on its axis. He mapped out the true nature of solar and lunar eclipses using seriously complex mathematical equations. He even made observations in trigonometry that are widely credited as the discovery of the sine and cosine functions. You know, the exact same math modern engineers use right now to build suspension bridges and program our software. It's wild.
Then there's the concept of
zero. Now, to be clear, zero as a philosophical idea was a much earlier Indian invention, but it was during this very Gupta period that the eminent mathematician Varahamihira became the earliest datable scholar to represent zero as both a symbol and a functional mathematical number. The so what of this is absolutely monumental. Seriously, without zero acting as both a placeholder and an actual value, the complex algebra, calculus, and digital computing of our modern world literally could not exist. No computers, no smartphones, period.
Section 4. Literature, art, and learning, the Renaissance. So, moving from hard math to the human experience, the peace of the Gupta era sparked a total cultural renaissance. But look, a golden age is only truly golden if it actually benefits everyday people, right? This quote from Fa Hien, a Chinese Buddhist monk who traveled all through the empire around 415 CE, is absolutely vital here. He wrote, "All the poor orphans go to those houses and get help, and when they're better, they're able to leave on their own." He was talking about noble families literally setting up charity houses and hospitals. The sick and the poor got free food, free medicine, and a doctor's care until they were fully recovered. It's a first-hand account proving the Guptas' staggering wealth wasn't just locked away in some palace vault. It actively flowed into public welfare.
And this incredibly thriving economy, built on strong agriculture and massive global trade networks, also funded some unparalleled institutions of learning. The most famous, by far, was Nalanda University. What's super fascinating about Nalanda is that the Guptas were a strictly Hindu dynasty, yet they generously funded this massive Buddhist center of learning. Talk about open-mindedness. It drew brilliant scholars from all over Asia to study not just Buddhist theology, but medicine, astronomy, and the ancient Vedas.
Let's move to and see how this builds into an undeniable cultural peak. You've got Kalidasa, often hailed as the greatest classical Sanskrit poet and dramatist, writing absolute masterpieces. You've got the construction of the very first grand stone temples. Then there are metallurgical marvels, like the famous Iron Pillar of Delhi, which has miraculously resisted rusting for well over 1,000 years. And over in medicine, legendary scholars like Sushruta and Charaka were vastly expanding Ayurvedic knowledge. It was a society quite literally firing on all cylinders, cementing exactly why this is universally heralded as a true renaissance.
Section 5. The Resurgence of Hinduism, Codification and Temples.
As we look deeper into this era, it's really incredible to see how the Guptas sponsored a massive codification of ancient religious traditions. They were the first major empire in history to adopt Hinduism as their primary religion. They actively promoted Sanskrit learning and started organizing these much older ancient Vedic texts into a much more structured framework. Right at the core of this was the concept of the Trimurti, which represents the three vital cosmic forces: Brahma, the force of creation; Vishnu, the force of preservation; and Shiva, the force of destruction.
Let's zoom in a bit on two of these deities, especially since their first grand stone temples began popping up during this exact period. First, you have Vishnu, the preserver. He maintains the order of the universe and is widely worshipped as the supreme deity, sometimes taking human-like avatars like Krishna to restore balance when things go awry. Then, on the other side, there's Shiva, representing destruction. But here's the key thing to understand. Within this framework, destruction is not seen as a bad thing. It's actually viewed neutrally, as a completely necessary, integral part of the continuous cycle of creation and preservation. This era also brought about a lot of shifting social dynamics, bringing us to a text I am almost certain you've heard of, the Kama Sutra. But here's a surprising fact for you. Despite its modern pop culture reputation as just a manual for physical intimacy, the text, which was written during the Gupta period, was mostly a broad, practical, philosophical guide on relationships and social expectations. It actually dealt heavily with ordinary day-to-day domestic duties, advising spouses on how to run a household. It even explicitly notes that women were expected to manage the household finances and staff. So yes, it was deeply rooted in pursuit of pleasure, but strictly within the proper expected context of a loving, dutiful marriage.
Section 6. Decline and Lasting Legacy, the Fall.
So, the crucial point is that empires rarely just collapse overnight. Eventually, the political structures that propped up this incredible society started to crack. For the Guptas, it was a cascading chain of failures. Step 1, waves of Huns started invading from the northwest in the early 6th century, which seriously drained the empire's military resources. Step 2, all that constant warfare caused massive economic strain. Step 3, as the central power weakened, those powerful provincial governors we talked about earlier started asserting their own independence. And finally, internal succession disputes completely fractured the royal family from the inside out. By the 540 CE, the last known Gupta emperor simply vanished from the historical record.
Ultimately, as you can see mapped out here,
The political borders dissolved entirely, and northern India slipped right back into a period of regional fragmentation. The unified superpower was officially gone. But, and this is a massive but, the cultural, religious, and scientific exports they produced, everything from the mathematical concept of zero to incredible classical Sanskrit literature, had already spread far and wide along the trade routes. They had already fundamentally changed not just India, but quite literally the rest of the world.
Which leaves us with this final thought. The Gupta emperors absolutely lost their thrones, and their political borders were totally erased from the map. But every single time you use a zero in math, or calculate the radius of a circle, or look up at the stars and understand the Earth's rotation, you are directly relying on the sheer brilliance fostered under their rule. So I leave you with this. Does a golden age ever truly end if its ideas and discoveries survive forever? Think about that as you go about your day. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep exploring.